Every man who laughed at my jokes today might be shooting at my car tomorrow.
My name is Alphonse Capone. This is my diary. Not written for strangers' eyes, never meant for strangers' ears. But here it lies now, between the forbidden shelves of Grimwick's library, where shadows whisper their own stories. Today I tell you about the chair at the head of the table, the seat Johnny left me, not by choice but by necessity. The moment I understood, I was no longer the student. I was the teacher, the judge, the king. So lean back. Listen to me. These pages don't show you pictures, they show you thoughts. Thoughts that weigh heavier than gold, and sometimes are deadlier than any bullet. Entry 8. The chair at the head of the table. 1925 to 1926. Chapter 1. The empty seat. Johnny was gone. Italy, sunshine, recovery. Maybe just escape if I'm being honest with myself. What remained was an empty chair in Cicero. A chair that every man in that room stared at like it might catch fire if touched wrong. 23 pairs of eyes watching that empty seat like it was a throne made of dynamite. I walked into that room on a Tuesday morning in February. Snow falling outside the windows like the city was trying to bury its sins under something clean and white. The Hawthorne Inn's back room smelled like cigar smoke and nervous sweat. The kind of smell that comes from men who don't know whether they're attending a coronation or a funeral. Frank Nitti sat to the left of the empty chair, ledgers spread in front of him like prayer books. Jack McGurn leaned against the wall, hand resting casual on the gun under his coat. Tony Accardo, young but sharp, watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. The rest, enforcers, bookkeepers, ward healers, cops who pretended they were just there for the coffee, filled the room with the weight of waiting. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting for words that Johnny would have spoken, wisdom that would make everything clear, orders that would tell them exactly what to do and when to do it and why it mattered. I didn't give them a speech. I sat down in Johnny's chair, not with a smile that would have looked weak, not with a toast that would have felt premature, but with the self-evidence of a man who understood that in our business, hesitation is a coffin you build yourself. The chair felt heavier than I expected, like sitting down meant accepting weight that couldn't be set aside when your back got tired. Every decision made from this seat would echo through Chicago's streets, would determine who lived and who died, who got rich and who got buried. I let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable, until some of the younger guys started shifting in their seats like they needed permission to breathe. Silence is power. Johnny had taught me that, and it was one lesson I'd learned perfectly. Then, finally, we continue. More beer, more streets, more order. No speech, no poetry, no promises about bright futures or golden opportunities. Just the new grammar of Chicago, written in words that left no room for interpretation. Johnny built the foundation, I continued, looking at each man long enough to read what was written in his eyes. We're going to build the building. Taller, stronger, more profitable than anything this city's ever seen. Questions? Nobody questioned. They'd already made their choice by showing up to this meeting instead of the dozen other meetings they could have attended, with men who might have thought they deserved this chair more than I did. Chapter 2. Writing my own rules. Johnny had his Bible. Budget violence. Keep books in your head, not on paper. Peace before blood. I knew it by heart. Hell, I could recite it backwards in my sleep. But a Bible's only as strong as the believers who follow it. and I'd learned something Johnny never quite accepted. The North Side didn't believe in any gospel except the gospel of the gun. Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran were writing their psalms in shell casings, composing symphonies in machine gun fire, preaching sermons that ended with funerals and newspaper headlines. You couldn't negotiate with men like that using Johnny's gentle methods. They'd just see gentleness as weakness, and weakness as invitation. So I wrote my own rules, and I made sure every man in that room understood them before they left. Rule 1. Who works for me lives better than he ever dared to dream. Not just paychecks, real money. The kind that bought houses instead of rent, cars instead of trolley tickets, futures instead of just next week's. Loyalty earned with prosperity, not just demanded with threats. Rule 2. Who betrays me lives shorter than he ever dared to fear. No warnings, no second chances, no negotiations about misunderstandings or mistakes. Betrayal was cancer, and you don't negotiate with cancer. You cut it out before it spreads. Rule 3. Order doesn't come from prayers, but from fear. Not mindless fear that makes men run away, but calculated fear that makes them think twice before stepping out of line. The kind of fear that keeps everybody safe by making danger predictable. The men at the table understood immediately. No law books full of clauses and exceptions, just clear sentences that meant exactly what they said. I wasn't a fox like Johnny, moving subtle through shadows and preferring handshakes to headlines. I was something different, louder, more visible, more willing to show teeth when teeth needed showing. Johnny was the professor, I told them, standing up so they could all see me clearly. I'm the enforcer. Johnny taught you how to think. I'm going to teach you how to win. Frank Nitti smiled like a man who'd been waiting years to hear those exact words. McGurn cracked his knuckles with the sound of a man getting ready for work he actually enjoyed. Even the cops in the room looked relieved. They'd been pretending to believe in law and order for so long, it must have been exhausting.
Every diary you hear is bought with hours of life. Be among the first to preserve this library. Become a founding patron. Link in the description.
Chapter 3. Building the Machine. Chicago wasn't chaos anymore. It was a factory, and I was the foreman who understood that every worker needed to know his place in the production line. Every man a gear, every business an axle, every operation connected to every other operation like parts in a machine designed by someone who actually understood how machines worked. Beer flowed like oil through pipelines that stretched from Canadian borders to Chicago basements, through warehouses that looked legitimate, and trucks that carried paperwork nobody examined too closely. Brothels operated like assembly lines, girls checked by doctors, customers screened by management, profits calculated to the penny. Gambling dens ran with the precision of banks because they were banks, really. Just banks that didn't ask questions about where money came from, only where it was going. I put Capilupo in charge of warehouses because he understood logistics better than any West Point graduate. Jack McGurn handled discipline because he understood that discipline was just violence applied with precision and timing. Frank Nitti managed the books because he could make numbers dance in ways that made accountants weep with jealousy. May said once, watching me coordinate operations from the Hawthorne Inn's office, "Al, you conduct them like an orchestra conductor." She was right, but my music wasn't Mozart. It was loud, brassy, with trumpets made of brass knuckles and drumsticks made of lead pipes. The kind of music that made people pay attention whether they wanted to or not. The machine roared day and night. Deliveries at dawn, collections at noon, enforcement at midnight. Money flowed in so fast we had to hire more accountants just to count it. More lawyers to explain why it was legal. More politicians to make sure it stayed legal. Who didn't turn with the machine got pulled out, sometimes gently, with bonuses and recommendations for employment elsewhere. Sometimes with a bang that the whole city could hear, a lesson written in blood for anyone who thought they could gum up the gears. I remember one morning, standing on the roof of the Hawthorne Inn, looking out at a city that was humming with our operations. Trucks rolling, speakeasies opening, money moving through channels we dug like irrigation ditches watering a garden that grew nothing but profit. This, I said to McGurn, who'd come up to report on the night's collections. This is what empire looks like. Not armies and flags, just organization, efficiency. Everybody knowing their job and doing it right. He nodded, counting the thick envelope he'd brought for my approval. Johnny built a business. You built a kingdom. Not yet, I thought, but soon.
Chapter 4.
The lion's share. Power comes with appetite, and hunger that grows the more you feed it, that turns reasonable men into gluttons who can't stop reaching for more. I ate better than any senator. Meals at restaurants where the chef came to the table personally to describe what he'd prepared. I drank champagne, still cold from the ship that brought it across the Atlantic. Wines that cost more per bottle than most men made in a month. Women, an endless carousel of beauty and availability. Girls who understood that Al Capone's attention came with benefits that outlasted whatever else they might have been doing with their evenings. I'm not proud of that part, but I won't lie about it neither. Power attracts, and I stopped pretending I didn't enjoy being attractive. Cars got bigger, shinier, more bulletproof. The Cadillac V16 that cost more than most houses. The Pierce Arrow with curtains thick enough to stop anything smaller than a cannon. The Lincoln that rode so smooth you could drink champagne in the back seat while doing 70, through traffic that parted like the Red Sea when they saw my convoy coming. I showed myself, because I understood something Johnny never quite grasped. Fear grows faster when you feed it with images. Let them see the cars, the clothes, the cigars that cost $5 each. Let them watch me walk into restaurants where mayors ate, and walk out with the mayors following me, asking for favors I might or might not grant, depending on how generous I felt.
Newspapers wrote that I was a king. They meant it as an accusation, proof of corruption and moral decay and everything wrong with modern America. I took it as simple truth. I was the man who didn't just rule Chicago but celebrated it, who made power look like something worth having instead of something to hide like a shameful secret. People saw my convoys rolling down Michigan Avenue like mobile fortresses. They heard my laughter in nightclubs where normal citizens couldn't get past the doorman. They tasted my beer in speakeasies from Cicero to the Gold Coast. They hated me. They loved me. They envied me. They feared me. But they never ignored me. And in Chicago, being ignored was worse than being hated. Chapter 5. Friends and Foes. The chair at the head of the table was comfortable, but it was also burning hot. The kind of heat that reminded you constantly that comfort and danger lived in the same piece of furniture. Friends who smiled too often were potentially more dangerous than enemies who scowled, because at least enemies were honest about their intentions. I learned to read eyes the way other men read financial reports. A blink that lasted too long meant someone was calculating odds. A glance that was too short meant someone was hiding thoughts that wouldn't survive examination. Hands that stayed too still meant weapons within reach. Laughter that came too quick meant nervousness disguised as friendship. My men swore loyalty with their hands on their hearts and their eyes on my wallet.
But loyalty in Chicago was like ice in springtime. Beautiful, useful, and fundamentally temporary. I knew that every man who laughed at my jokes today might be shooting at my car tomorrow if someone offered him a better deal, or scared him worse than I scared him. That knowledge kept me awake at night, not because I was afraid, but because awareness was the price of survival. You sleep sound and you wake up dead. Simple as that. Frank Nitti. I trusted because he loved numbers more than people. And numbers don't lie, even when people do. McGurn. I trusted because violence was his art form, and artists don't betray their patrons until they find richer ones. Accardo. I trusted because he was too smart to make dumb mistakes, and too young to have made all the mistakes that made men stupid. But trust was always conditional, always temporary, always subject to revision based on new information or changed circumstances. The moment you trusted someone completely was the moment they had permission to destroy you.
Chapter 6.
Reflections in the dark. Nights, when the clubs went quiet, and even champagne tasted like water with bubbles, I thought about Johnny. Whether he breathed easier in Italy, whether he counted his wounds like coins saved from a robbery, whether he regretted leaving or regretted staying as long as he had. I asked myself questions I couldn't answer. Would Johnny have wanted me to rule harder or softer? To show more mercy or less? To be more like him or more like myself? Then I'd look in the mirror. The big one in my hotel suite. The one that couldn't lie even when I wanted it to. Scars on my face from Frank Galluccio's knife. Whew. Cigar between my teeth like a punctuation mark. Suit that cost more than my father made in a year of cutting hair. A face that was half preacher, half executioner. Eyes that had seen too much to pretend innocence. Hands that had done too much to claim cleanliness. I understood, looking at that reflection, that I wasn't a fox like Johnny. I was something new. Something Chicago had never seen before, and might never see again. A man who held order and chaos in the same fist. Who could quote scripture and order executions in the same breath. Who understood that civilization was just organized violence with better table manners. Johnny had taught me to think like a businessman. Chicago taught me to act like a warlord. Somewhere between those two educations, I'd become something that didn't have a name yet, but would eventually be called Public Enemy Number 1.
Chapter 7. The Crown Without Jewels. A king without a crown, just a chair made of wood, a table full of men, a city map full of streets that all led to the same throne room. But that was enough, because power doesn't need jewels or ceremony or official recognition. It just needs everyone in the room to understand one simple fact. When you stand up, it's only because I allowed you to stand up. When you leave, it's because I didn't need you to stay. When you speak, it's because I wanted to hear what you had to say. And so my kingdom began. Not with trumpets announcing my arrival or bells celebrating my coronation. Just with a chair, a voice, and a city that finally understood who it belonged to. Chicago had been trying to figure out who was boss since the first brick was laid on swampland that should never have become a city. Now, it knew. The answer wasn't a committee, or a coalition, or a delicate balance of competing interests. The answer was me, Al Capone,
Brooklyn boy made good, sitting in a chair that Johnny Torrio had vacated, because bullets have a way of making men reconsider their career choices. I looked around that room full of men who'd decided to follow me instead of fighting me, and I understood something that would have made Johnny proud. Power isn't taken, it's accepted. These men weren't following me because I forced them. They were following me because I'd convinced them that following me was the smartest choice they could make.
And that, right there, was the difference between a gangster and a statesman. A gangster takes power by force and holds it by fear. A statesman accepts power by consensus and holds it by making sure everyone prospers enough to prefer stability over revolution. I was both, and I was neither. I was something new, a hybrid that Chicago had created by making everything else illegal and then acting surprised when illegal things became organized like legitimate businesses. The chair at the head of the table wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol of everything I'd learned, everything I'd become, everything I intended to accomplish before the music stopped and somebody else tried to sit down. For now, though, the chair was mine. The city was mine. The future was mine to write however I wanted, in whatever ink I chose, with whatever ending I could imagine. And I imagined something bigger than Brooklyn, bigger than Chicago, bigger than anything America had seen before. I imagined empire, but empire needs fuel. And in Chicago, 1926, fuel came in bottles. Canadian whiskey, European wine, beer that flowed through pipes like the city's lifeblood. The chair gave me power. Now I needed to fill the treasury that power required. The next chapter was already being written in warehouses along the lake, in trucks crossing borders at midnight, in deals made with men whose handshakes smelled like hops and barley. Blood and beer. That's what built kingdoms in Prohibition America. But that story, how we turned Lake Michigan into a pipeline and Canada into our private distillery. Well, that's for next time. When I tell you how Chicago learned to drink from my cup, whether it wanted to or not.
I trust you enjoyed this glimpse into a most curious diary. If so, leave behind a small token of your delight with a like, and do consider joining our circle by subscribing. And remember, ring the little bell, and you shall be the very first to know when another diary or a fresh entry emerges from the shadows. And if a whisper stirs in your mind, a thought, a riddle, perhaps a name of someone whose secrets you would dare to uncover, leave it for me below. I read them one by one. And who knows, your wish may guide my hand to the very next diary I choose from my collection.